Right. Hello and welcome. I'm going to admit everybody.
Rain off and on, and then out. It was crazy. He decided he
Okay. Hello and welcome to the Building Better Futures Impact Aid School Construction webinar. We are so excited to have you here. I am Nicole Russell. I am the Executive Director of the National Association of Federally Impacted Schools, or NAFIS. And today we are going to talk all things construction as we celebrate our Impact Aid Infrastructure Week. All right. So today we are going to give you just a quick refresher on Impact Aid, talk about the infrastructure needs of our federally impacted schools, and then dive a little bit deeper into Section 7007, the construction program of Impact Aid, and then talk about our legislative priority, the Impact Aid Infrastructure Partnership Act. The National Association of Federally Impacted Schools, or NAFIS, has been around for over 50 years, and we are the voice for federally impacted schools in Washington, D.C. We educate Congress and the administration on Impact Aid, of course. We are their resource and go-to experts. We provide technical assistance to school districts and congressional staff, particularly this time of the year when legislation is being drafted and moving through Congress. We also coordinate with the House and Senate Impact Aid coalitions and serve as the umbrella association for 4 subgroups. Those 4 subgroups make up the NAFIS family. So that includes FLISA, our federal lands school districts that receive Section 7002 federal property, MESA, those military impacted schools, NISA, the National Indian Impacted Schools, and the Learning Opportunity Impacted Schools Association, which represents those districts that receive a learning opportunity threshold lot percentage of 50% or below. So, what is Impact Aid? Most of you in this room probably know, but as a reminder, Impact Aid is designed to reimburse school districts for lost property tax revenue due to the presence of non-taxable federal property. Of course, Section 7002 is tied to the federal land, while Section 7003 is tied to those additional costs of educating our federally connected students. Now, a typical school district revenue might look very different in your school district, but typically you're going to see 50% from the state, and the other 50% come from that local residential and commercial property taxes. Now, if the federal government is the primary or major landowner within a school district boundaries, that's going to significantly reduce that school district's revenue, which is where Impact Aid comes into play. Now, Impact Aid has 4 major sections to the law, that first one being that federal property, so our FLISA school districts receive those funds. And then 7003 is that basic support, which also includes a separate program specifically designed for payments for children on active IEPs, individualized education programs. But today, we're really going to focus on 7007, construction. So I am going to hand it over to my colleague, the NAFIS Director of Policy and Advocacy, Jason Scamenti, to dive a little deeper. Jason, take it away.
Thanks, Nicole. In the next few sections, we'll review some of the rationale for our efforts in this area and then provide an overview of the Section 707 Construction Grant Program, as well as the Impact Aid Infrastructure Partnership Act. First, the federal government has accepted the responsibility for helping to fund construction in federally impacted school districts. Our goal, or one of our goals at NAFIS, is to ensure that the federal government makes good on their promise. Impact Aid has included a construction program since its inception in 1950. However, as you can see here, investments in the construction program have dropped significantly over the years. While first funded at $74.5 million in 1951, the program has slowly lost funding, falling to $48.5 million in 2005 and then down to $17.8 million in 2006. Since then, the program has languished at that level with only slight increases in recent years, which have brought the program up to $19 million in the most recent government funding bill. A little note of interest, Congress first saw the need for facilities as their responsibility and passed the Operations and Maintenance Law. So it's clear to NAFIS and the broader education policy community that there is an urgent need for investment in school infrastructure. Many of our coalition partners have been discussing the need for federal funding for K-12 school infrastructure, but the Impact Aid construction program remains the only federal education funding dedicated to this purpose. This funding, while crucial for federally impacted school districts, has unfortunately fallen significantly short of the actual need. So here's a few statistics from some surveys that we've conducted and some others of interest. In 2017, a NAFIS survey found that more than $4.2 billion is required to finance the most pressing infrastructure projects in 211 responding school districts. In 2018, our subgroup NISA surveyed and found that 56% of school buildings in responding districts were in poor to fair condition. Nearly 33% had safety code violations. And finally, a 2020 GAO study found that 49% of responding federally impacted school districts needed HVAC updates or replacements in at least half of their buildings, and 35% needed multiple updates in each building. Here you can see a bar graph showing some of the percentages for unmet infrastructure needs from our NAFIS survey. I'll go kind of run through those real quick. 51% of respondents cited a need for emergency repairs, 58% needed technology upgrades, 60% expressed a need for additional building capacity, 67% cited a need for roofing renovation, 68% require HVAC repairs, and finally, a whopping 75% of respondents need general modernizations to their buildings. So NAFIS has been informally collecting information about the infrastructure needs of our members over the years. This map's a bit difficult to read at this size, but I'll read off a few highlights. In Grand Coulee Dam School District in Washington State, they've stated that 90% of the school district's land is state or federally owned. As a result, they have little ability to pass a construction bond and are heavily reliant on the Impact Aid construction program for their infrastructure needs. In Talihina Public School District in Oklahoma says that they use almost the entirety of their Impact Aid funding for transportation costs. So any increases in the construction funds would allow for needed facility improvements. And finally, Fremont County School District number 21 in Wyoming would use new construction funds to improve teacher housing, which we know is a huge issue of importance for our rural schools. So now we're going to dive into provide an overview of the Impact Aid's existing Section 7007 construction grant program and go through how the program is currently structured. First off, use of funds. Unlike most of Impact Aid, which can be used for any general fund purpose, construction grant funds are restricted to use on construction projects. This includes preparation of drawings and specifications for school facilities, construction, repair, modernization, and expansion of these facilities, and debt service for such activities. Funds may be used immediately or deposited into a school district's capital fund and saved for future projects. We always encourage schools to remain in close contact with the department's program analysts if they're concerned about the proper use of those funds. So by law, The construction program funds are to be divided into two grant programs, with 40% of the funds allocated by formula to eligible school districts and 60% dedicated to competitive grants and then typically assist districts with emergency facility needs. However, funding is so low that Congress instead allocates the full funding to competitive grants in odd fiscal years and formula grants in even fiscal years. This is accomplished through a rider in the annual appropriations bill. We'll start up with on the formula grant side. In these next slides, we'll go through each type of grant. We'll start with formulas, and funding for formula grants is automatically allocated to eligible school districts based on their Section 7003 applications. School districts do not need to apply. LEA serving either 50% Indian lands or 50% military connected students. Half of all formula funding is allocated to military districts and half is allocated to Indian land districts. Funds are allocated to individual districts based on the total number of weighted federal student units of military and Indian land children in the district. In FY22, the most recent formula grant year, 167 school districts received formula payments. Next up are competitive grants, which are divided into priority categories. These are a little complicated, so bear with me as I work through the priority lists. Priority 1 is LEA serves 50% lands or 50% military children. The LEA has an assessed value of less than 25 million or less than 50 million and have used 75% or more of their bonding capacity. And finally, or the LEA receives Section 7003B2 payments. These are the heavily impacted school districts. The second priority tier list includes an LEA or an individual school district within the LEA that has 40% Indian lands or military children. An LEA, or if the agency does not have the authority to tax or issue bonds, the agency's fiscal agent, that is at not less than 75% of the agency's limit of bonded indebtedness. C, if an LEA has an assessed value of real property per student that may be taxed for school purposes that is less than average of the assessed value of real property per student in the state. And D, a Section 702 LEA is eligible to apply for modernization grant if it meets the requirements noted in B and C above. So that was certainly a mouthful. However, in practice, due to the program's limited funds, emergency request grants, as measured by the threat that the school facility's condition poses to health, safety, and well-being of the students, are given first priority. Modernization grants would also be awarded if funds are available after all emergency grants have been made, but that has not been the case in recent years. For each project, the federal contribution is capped at 50% of the cost of the project, or $4 million during any 4-year period. However, there are exceptions to the rule. If this district does not have the authority to tax or issue bonds, the federal contribution can exceed these limits. But again, due to low funding levels, few grants are awarded. In FY23, 3 grant applications were funded, and in FY21, 6 grants were funded. So in this next section, we'll provide an overview of one of our top legislative priorities here at NAFIS, which is the Impact Aid Infrastructure Partnership Act. So our goal for this bill is to provide desperately needed funds to the Impact Aid construction program in order to address the significant backlog of facility needs at federally impacted schools. The bill, so here's we'll start with a description of the bill itself. The bill authorizes $1 billion over 4 years, $250 million per year, to provide funding to LEAs eligible to receive payments. 25% of the funds will be provided by formula grant to eligible districts, which include districts that have 20% or more children who reside on Indian lands or who are military connected. Nearly 300 school districts would receive formula grants funds under this bill. That's up from 167 in FY22 under the current criteria. Additionally, 75% of the funds would be provided through competitive grants, either as a grant in full or a grant with a matching requirement, depending on the ability of the LEA to pay. So some of you may be thinking, what is the difference between authorization and appropriation? Well, Congress is charged by the Constitution with making decisions about how to spend public money. In practice, these spending decisions are split into two parts, authorization and appropriations. Authorization is when Congress approves the use of funds for a specific purpose, but it doesn't guarantee the funds will actually be used for that purpose. Appropriation, on the other hand, is the actual allocation of funds for a specific purpose. In other words, the authorization is writing the check and the appropriation is the bank transmitting the funds. The bill also requires the Department of Education to establish and maintain a priority listing of school buildings based on need. Teacher housing is a new priority included in this bill this Congress. Previous versions of the bill did not include that, but we have heard from many NAFIS members that this is a top infrastructure priority for teacher recruitment and retention. Priority 1 is a facility in violation of building code representing a health hazard that fails to meet CDC standards, does not meet certain student capacity standards, or has a teacher housing repair or new construction needs. Priority 2 is a facility that does not meet the requirement of priority 1, but that fails to meet the minimum structural or health and safety standards as adopted by the American Society of Civil Engineers, or has an identified need for teacher housing repair or new construction. Eligible districts would be further prioritized as follows. LEAs that lack the authority to tax or issue bonds or have a total assessed value of real property that may be taxed for school purposes of less than $50 million. LEAs that have a total assessed property value of less than 100 million. Or 3, other considerations such as percentage of federally connected students, learning opportunity threshold percentage of taxable land, and feasibility of the completion of the project in 24 months. So here you'll see a list of the co-sponsors of the Senate version of the bill, which goes by bill number S2808. Is introduced by Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii. Senator Hirono is an important champion of impact aid, and we're very grateful for her leadership. And then similarly, here's a list of co-sponsors for the House version of the bill, which is identified as HR 6698 and was introduced by Congressman John Garamendi of California. Congressman Garamendi is another champion of impact aid, and we're also grateful for his leadership. We're also very excited to welcome our first Republican co-sponsor this Congress, Congressman Jay Obernolte of California. NAFIS will continue to work closely with our partners on the Hill to build bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate. So now you may be asking, what can you do to help advocate for additional investment in impact aid school infrastructure? First off, you can ask your member of Congress to co-sponsor this legislation using the NAFIS Action Center, which you can find at nafisdc.org. You can bring attention to the issue on social media. Be sure to include #ImpactAid and tag us at NAFIS Schools so we can help amplify your voice. And finally, you can read our weekly NAFIS news to stay up to date on the latest on impact aid and related issues. So now we'll open up to any questions from attendees. We'll feel free to enter your questions in the QA section, or I think we can raise a hand. We have staff on there to help kind of manage the flow of conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Jason. I also wanted to give a shout out to our friends at the Impact Aid Program Office who've joined us today. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I also want to recognize all those on the call. I know many of you have received construction funds, whether formula and or competitive. And special thanks to those in very far time zones like Alaska and Hawaii for joining us today as well. So Deb, you just asked, when is the deadline for applications? So for construction applications, I take it is what you're asking.
That's a great question.
That is a great question, and I don't have that in front of me, but we'll make sure to get you that answer. Other questions? Jacqueline Bass, thank you. Can we give Jacqueline, I will unmute you. Or I think you can unmute yourself. There. Yeah, go ahead, Jackie.
Okay. So just this year, the last year competition is closed. We'll probably open the 2025 application in March of next year, and it'll be open for probably 60 to 90 days. So the competition is currently closed, and we've awarded the grantees from the 23.
Thanks so much.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Jackie. So I'll put that in the chat as well, so people can reference that. Chad Wen from Mad River Schools in Ohio asked, his understanding is that the Impact Aid Infrastructure Partnership Act would benefit those who are currently not eligible, such as schools that are 20% connected versus 50% connected. Jason, would you care to respond?
We can bump that back to the qualifications line. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So it will. So absolutely. Thank
Yeah.
you for the question, Chad. This bill is certainly designed to expand eligibility to those school districts that we know really do need construction funds. And, of course, our, major priority is just to get more money into this program and to impact aid overall, so that more school districts can benefit. Oh, and thank you, Mount Adams, Washington, wants to know if NAFIS was able to attend the White House Summit on Sustainable and Healthy Schools and Grounds for K-12 schools and grounds last Friday. The White House did host, and it was mostly for those to tune in virtually. It was a very small population in the room on that summit. It was led by the Department of Energy, and it had a great shout out, particularly from those appointees within the Department of Education. Roberto Rodriguez from the Department of Education spoke at the summit. They had a few breakout panelists and really recognized those school districts who have made really great innovative strides in energy efficiency to improve student learning environments across the country. I know Seattle schools, Portland schools, Hamilton County in Indiana was present in the room as well. Are there minutes or recordings from that meeting? John Flynn just asked if that's in reference to the White House Summit. We can certainly put a link to that in the chat. Great. Yeah, we can. We'll include that in the chat and get that over to you. Any other questions about the Impact Aid construction program? Okay, Randy said they are over 74% federally connected and applied for a construction grant last year. They didn't receive any news as to why they weren't chosen. Do you know if this is typical? I would certainly put you in touch with the program analyst that covers Section 7007 construction grants, because there could be ways to maybe improve the application or information, that might be, beneficial to include in your next application, perhaps. but really talking through maybe the details of it to get a better understanding would be helpful. So we can put you in touch there. And for those interested in the White House Summit on Friday, the link is in the chat if you're interested in listening to that. It is about 2.5 hours long. So, maybe you have a long commute time in some of those rural areas, but it is definitely worth a listen. And Brent in the chat, hi, Brent. He's the executive director of the National Indian Impacted Schools Association, mentioned that the Impact Aid Infrastructure Partnership Act would require the Department of Education to establish and maintain the applicant list as the old 81-815 program. In essence, you would stay on the list until the project is funded or the legislation expires.
Very helpful.
Great. And of course, if you have any further questions, know that NAFIS is here for you in DC as a resource. We're connected with the Impact Aid Program Office. We work for you, our NAFIS members and Impact Aid recipients across the US. So please never hesitate to reach out to us. We want to help you, and we want to help you maximize those Impact Aid dollars, and we will continue to advocate for more funding for Impact Aid as a whole, as well as directing more funding towards our federally impacted schools and their infrastructure needs. So great to see so many of you. Again, don't hesitate to reach out. We hope you will participate and take action in our Action Center as we recognize Impact Aid Infrastructure Week. And we look forward to seeing some of you soon. And of course, again, always feel free to reach out. We're here for you. Thank you, everyone.